The morning sun filtered through Daniel's blinds, painting long golden streaks across his kitchen table. He was sipping his usual black coffee when a thick white envelope slid under his door. At first, he thought it was junk mail, another flyer about lawn services or pest control. But the bold red letters stamped across the front caught his eye. Notice of violation. Inside, his heart sank as he read, "Dear resident, you are hereby fined $250,000 for repeated violations of HOA regulations." Daniel almost choked. On his coffee, $250,000. For what? He skimmed the list of supposed infractions. Unapproved renovations, improper landscaping, even unauthorized structures. But here's the kicker. Daniel had never signed up for any HOA. His home sat on a quiet plot of land at the edge of the neighborhood. It didn't belong to their community. Confused, he marched down to the HOA office, where he was greeted by the infamous Karen, the HOA president. Her bleach blonde bob and condescending smirk were as sharp as her tone. "Daniel, we've warned you enough times," she said, tapping her manicured nails on the counter. "Your land falls under our jurisdiction. Pay the fine, or we'll take legal action." Something inside him snapped. "My land doesn't belong to your HOA," he shot back. Karen leaned closer, her perfume suffocating. "Oh, sweetie, it does now. We expanded the neighborhood boundaries years ago. You should have read the notices." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He rummaged through his late grandfather's old wooden chest, searching for property documents. Among faded maps and deeds, he discovered something astonishing, a decades-old survey showing the entire neighborhood had been built on land his grandfather still technically owned. The HOA wasn't fining him. They were trespassing on his land. And Karen? She had just picked a fight with the wrong family. Asterisk. The HOS fine notice still sat on my kitchen counter, glaring at me like a neon sign. $250,000 due immediately. The absurdity of it gnawed at my thoughts. No fence, no paint job. No lawn could possibly rack up that kind of punishment. That night, I spread the HOAS rulebook across my table. Each page was filled with suffocating legal jargon designed to intimidate. I flipped past regulations about mailbox colors, pet sizes, and lawn heights until one phrase stopped me cold. Any lot within the association's jurisdiction is subject to forfeiture if deemed non-compliant. Forfeiture? They weren't just threatening me with money. They could take my land. But here was the kicker. In the margin of that same clause was a note, written in faint, almost erased handwriting. Exemption. Deed of 1978. Parcel A. My property. My father had told me about that deed years ago, claiming it contained language the HOA would never like. Suddenly, I understood. There was a loophole buried deep in the association's own contract, and my land might be untouchable. But before I could celebrate, my neighbor Carl knocked on my door. Carl had always been decent, quiet, friendly. The kind of man who offered you tools without asking for them back. Yet that night, his face was different. Cold. Calculated. "You should just pay," he said flatly. "Fighting them is a mistake," I frowned. "Carl, you know this fine is insane. You know it's wrong." He avoided my eyes. "Rules are rules." And then, under his breath, "Besides, some of us are tired of you acting like you're better than the rest of us." It stung. Carl wasn't just echoing the HOA, he was siding with them. Or maybe he was being pushed. I thought of the HOA. President Karen, with her painted-on smile and venomous words. Was she pulling Carl's strings? The next morning, I got my answer. Karen stood at the end of my driveway with two other board members, whispering loudly enough for passing neighbors to hear. "Some people don't belong in this neighborhood," she said, eyes darting toward me. "Can't even pay their debts." Makes you wonder where they got the money to buy their house in the first place. I clenched my fists. They weren't just after my property, they were after my reputation. But if Karen wanted war, I had something she didn't, that mysterious clause. And I was going to dig deeper. Asterisk. The HOA wasn't about to back down. Karen, the self-appointed queen bee of the neighborhood, stormed into Jonathan's yard with a clipboard in one hand and a smug smile plastered across her face. "You think you're clever, Jonathan," she sneered, waving her papers dramatically. "But the HOA doesn't play games. According to this clause," she jabbed at the paper, "we have the right to impose fines retroactively for non-compliance. And guess what? You owe $250,000. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, trying not to laugh at the absurdity. "Retroactively? That's not even legal." "Oh, it is," Karen snapped, grinning with villainous delight. "This community runs on rules, and I make the rules. So unless you want liens slapped on your property and your house auctioned off, I'd suggest you cooperate." For the first time, Jonathan felt a flicker of unease. He had read his deed, but Karen seemed too confident, almost as if she knew something he didn't single quotes T-dot. Then Karen delivered the bombshell. "Oh, and did I mention? We've been lobbying the county for years. That wooded lot of yours? The one you never touch? The HOA board petitioned to seize it as community property. We're converting it into a clubhouse and tennis courts." Jonathan froze. That land wasn't just a patch of trees. It was the last untouched piece of his grandfather's property, filled with childhood memories and hidden value. He had plans for it, though he'd never told anyone. And now this HOA wanted to take it. Karen leaned closer, her perfume suffocating. "Face it, Jonathan, you've lost. Either pay the fines or lose everything. The HOA owns you now." Jonathan didn't flinch. Instead, he allowed a slow grin to creep across his face. "Karen, I think you've just made a very big mistake." For the first time, she looked uncertain. Jonathan wasn't bluffing. He had just remembered something buried in his grandfather's old will. Something that could flip the entire power dynamic on its head. Asterisk. Weeks passed, and Sarah thought the situation with the HOA had cooled down. She avoided Karen whenever possible, focusing on her work and enjoying her new house. But one Friday evening, as Sarah sorted through her mail, she froze. Among the usual letters was a bold envelope stamped with HOA notice, immediate action required. Inside was a shocking bill, $5,000 in fines. The HOA claimed she had violated community standards by parking too close to the sidewalk, failing to repaint her mailbox, allowing her wild, uncontrolled dog to run free. Sarah's jaw dropped. First of all, she didn't own a dog. Second, she parked in her own driveway. And third, her mailbox was brand new. She stormed outside to find Karen chatting smugly with another neighbor, sipping iced tea. "Karen!" Sarah snapped, holding the bill. "What is this nonsense?" Karen smirked. "Oh, that? Just a few community concerns. Nothing personal. Rules are rules, Sarah. You'll need to pay." Sarah's blood boiled. "This is fabricated. I don't even have a dog." Karen leaned in, lowering her voice with a cruel grin. "Well, maybe someone saw one. Or maybe rules are flexible depending on who's watching." Sarah felt her stomach turn. This wasn't just about flowers or driveways. Karen was using the HOA as her personal weapon. That night, Sarah sat at her desk, flipping through the HOA handbook. She noticed something strange. Some violations listed on her bill weren't even in the rules. The deeper she read, the more inconsistencies she found. And then, the twist came. As she searched online, Sarah stumbled upon a local community forum Buried in the posts were complaints from former residents of her neighborhood. The same pattern appeared: unfair fines, harassment, and even forced home sales. At the center of nearly every story was one name: Karen. Sarah's pulse quickened. This wasn't a personal vendetta. This was a pattern. And it meant Karen had been doing this for years. For the first time, Sarah realized she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was about to uncover something much bigger. Asterisk. The neighborhood was buzzing after Karen's public meltdown. Some homeowners were furious, others amused, but everyone agreed on one thing. Mark had exposed her hypocrisy in a way no one ever had before. For the first time, Karen's iron grip on the HOA felt shaky. Mark, however, wasn't celebrating. Something about the situation bothered him. After Karen stormed out of the HOA meeting, she had hurled a cryptic warning at him. "You don't know what you've started. Watch your back." 2 days later, Mark came home from work to find his security cameras offline. The live feed showed nothing but static. He checked the hardware too. Of his outdoor cameras had been ripped clean off the wall. Only twisted wires remained. At first, he assumed it was vandalism by local teenagers. But then he noticed something chilling. The cameras weren't stolen, just destroyed. Whoever did it didn't want surveillance. They wanted silence. Mark called the police, but they brushed it off as likely kids messing around. Frustrated, he checked with his neighbors. To his surprise, 3 other homeowners reported the same thing. Their cameras had been ripped out in the last week. And all of them had one thing in common. They had spoken against Karen during HOA meetings. It was too precise to be coincidence. Mark brought this up at the next HOA gathering, holding up photos of his ripped cameras. Karen, sitting smugly at the head of the table, leaned back with a sly grin. Maybe if people followed community rules, they wouldn't have so many accidents, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went silent. It was as close to a confession as Karen would ever give. But what unsettled Mark the most wasn't Karen's smirk. It was the look exchanged between her and another board member, Mr. Collins. It was quick, subtle, but undeniable. Karen wasn't acting alone. That night, Mark decided he wouldn't let this slide. He set up a hidden camera inside his garage, one nobody knew about. If Karen or whoever she was working with tried anything again, this time he'd have proof. He didn't have to wait long. Just 3 nights later, the motion sensor triggered. The hidden feed showed a shadow slipping into his backyard, flashlight in hand. The figure crouched, examining his new cameras. When the intruder lifted their head, Mark froze. It wasn't Karen. It was Mr. Collins, and in his hand was a copy of Karen's HOA master key. The morning after the mysterious footprints incident, Alex woke to the sound of soft knocking on his door. When he opened it, no one was there, only a neatly folded envelope taped to the frame. His heart skipped. He glanced around, but the street was empty. The envelope had no name, just a single word scrawled across it in messy ink: Truth. He closed the door and tore it open. Inside was a short letter written in sharp, rushed handwriting. Not everything is as it seems. The HOA is hiding more than fines and rules. Karen's power comes from something bigger. Watch the old warehouse at midnight if you want answers. Alex froze. The warehouse mentioned was at the edge of the community, an abandoned property that had been locked up for years. No one dared go near it. The letter gave no signature, but the tone was urgent, almost fearful. That evening, Alex couldn't focus on anything else. He replayed the note in his head, wondering if it was a trap or a genuine attempt to warn him. By nightfall, his decision was made. He had to go. He couldn't keep living under constant fear and secrecy. At midnight, Alex slipped out of his house, every step tense with anticipation. The streets were eerily quiet, the lamps casting long shadows on the pavement. When he reached the warehouse, he noticed something strange, a faint glow coming from one of the high windows. He crept closer and peered through a crack in the door. Inside, Karen was standing with two men Alex had never seen before, both dressed in expensive suits. Spread out on a table before them were stacks of documents, files, and a large binder stamped with the HOA logo. Alex's stomach knotted. He could only catch fragments of their conversation. Control the neighborhood. Property deals. Keep 'em in check. It was clear they weren't just talking about lawn heights and fence colors. And then, suddenly, Karen looked directly toward the door, her eyes narrowing as if she sensed him watching. Alex ducked back, holding his breath, heart pounding in his ears. Had she seen him? He ran home in the darkness, clutching the letter, his mind spinning. The HOA wasn't just about Karen's ego, it was something far darker. And now, Alex realized. He was in the middle of it. Sarah sat on her porch, still reeling from the unexpected arrival of the police the previous evening. Karen had filed yet another false complaint, claiming Sarah's dangerous dog had bitten a neighbor. Of course, there was no dog, only Sarah's cat, Luna. The officers had quickly realized it was nonsense, but the humiliation of having flashing lights outside her home once again was eating at her dot. Sarah poured herself a cup of tea, her hands trembling. She couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's crusade wasn't just about her lawn or her cat. There was something deeper, something personal. She glanced toward the HOA office shed at the end of the cul-de-sac. Karen practically lived in that office, guarding it like a fortress. Later that day, Sarah decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear her head. Passing by the office shed, she noticed the door slightly ajar. That was strange. Karen was obsessive about keeping it locked. Curiosity gnawed at her. Against her better judgment, Sarah pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled of mildew and paper. Stacks of HOA files and complaint forms were piled high. The one folder sat on the desk in plain sight. It had her name written across the front in bold red ink. Heart racing, she flipped it open. Inside were printed photographs of her house taken at odd hours, her mowing the lawn, her bringing groceries in, even one through her window, while she read on the couch. But the most chilling discovery wasn't the photos. Beneath them lay an old letter addressed to Karen, signed by a man Sarah didn't recognize. The letter accused Karen of forging HOA votes, pocketing money from community fees, and threatening neighbors into silence. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, as if the writer had been desperate to get the truth out. Suddenly, Sarah heard footsteps outside the shed. She shoved the folder back onto the desk and ducked behind a filing cabinet. Karen's voice pierced the silence. "Who's been in here?" she hissed, her tone sharp with paranoia. Sarah held her breath, heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was one step closer to uncovering Karen's secrets. But if she got caught now, Karen would make her life a nightmare she couldn't escape. The night of the HOA meeting arrived, and the tension in the neighborhood was so thick. You could almost feel it in the air. Everyone gathered in the small clubhouse at the edge of the community. Folding chairs lined the room, and a long table was set up in the front for the HOA board. Karen, dressed in a blazer that looked 2 sizes too tight, sat smugly in the center as if she owned the place. She had already stacked a pile of papers in front of her, each one full of violations she had written against her neighbors. Then fences, overgrown bushes, cars parked slightly over the line, even Halloween decorations left up too long. As the room filled with murmurs and frustrated sighs, James felt the weight of every eye turning toward him. He sat with his wife by his side, gripping the file folder he put together. It contained not just his defense, but shocking evidence he had uncovered about Karen's misuse of HOA funds. Karen cleared her throat dramatically and called the meeting to order. "Let's begin," she said, her voice sharp. "First item, mister. James has failed to comply with repeated warnings about his fence. His refusal to obey HOA guidelines is setting a dangerous precedent for this community." James stood, his voice calm but steady. "I'd like to respond to that." He held up a photo. "This fence you're talking about? I repaired it last month. But what's more important is what I found while reviewing HOA financial statements." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's smirk faltered for the first time. James continued, pulling out receipts. Over $5,000 was withdrawn for community improvement, but not a single improvement was made. Instead, the money went to a company called Clearview Solutions, a company registered under Karen's son's name. The room erupted. Neighbors shouted, demanding answers. Karen's face turned red as she stammered. That's not true. This is a smear campaign." But the crowd wasn't buying it. For the first time, Karen was on the defensive. James sat back down, his heart pounding. He knew this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't the type to back down. She would come back swinging. And the real fight was only starting. The flashing red and blue lights reflected across the manicured lawns, startling neighbors who peeked nervously from behind curtains. The HOA president, Mr. Whitaker, stood trembling, his confident tone faltering now that law enforcement had arrived. Behind him, Mrs. Hargrove, the self-proclaimed Karen Queen of the neighborhood, clutched her pearls, insisting she was the victim of a reckless homeowner who endangered everyone. Officer Daniels stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He had been through countless HOA disputes before, but something about this case felt different. "We received multiple complaints," he began, his eyes moving from the frightened homeowner to the HOA board. "But we also received evidence." At that moment, the homeowner produced a USB drive. On it was a collection of damning videos. Board members using HOA funds for personal vacations, inflating fines against families they disliked, and most shocking of all, a clip of Mrs. Hargrove deliberately damaging her neighbor's mailbox, to later accuse them of vandalism. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Mrs. Hargrove's face turned pale. That's fabricated," she stammered. But Daniels didn't look convinced. He handed the drive to his partner, whispering something before turning back. "We'll need to investigate further, but this doesn't look good." Whitaker tried to regain control. "This is all irrelevant. The homeowner broke rules. That's the only issue." But before he could finish, a young man from the crowd, an ex-member of the HOA board, spoke up. "No, the issue is corruption. I left this board because I saw what they were doing, and now everyone else knows too." The tide was shifting. Neighbors murmured, emboldened by the truth. Years of silent frustration poured out stories of unfair fines, intimidation, and threats. The HOA's iron grip on the neighborhood was cracking, but Mrs. Hargrove wasn't finished. Her lips curled into a smile that chilled everyone. "You think this ends here? You have no idea what we're capable of. We make the rules, and we're just getting started." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. This was no longer a petty neighborhood squabble. It was the beginning of a war. Asterisk. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, tension in the neighborhood was thicker than the humid evening air. Mark had prepared his notes, evidence, and few bold questions he knew would put Karen on edge. But deep down, he felt a gnawing unease. Something wasn't adding up. Why was the HOA suddenly so aggressive? Why were neighbors too scared to speak up, whispering instead of standing firm? The clubhouse was packed more than usual. People came out of curiosity, others out of fear. Karen strutted in, heels clicking like gunshots against the floor, her pearls gleaming under the lights. She wore that same smug smile that had become her trademark. "Let's begin," she said, tapping her manicured fingers on the table. Mark waited, letting her present the usual financial reports and community violations. Then, when she tried to rush through the agenda, he stood. "I have some questions," he announced. His voice steady. Karen froze, her lips tightening. "Questions can wait until the end, as always." "Not tonight," Mark countered. He placed a folder on the table. Inside were photos of her private contractor vans pulling up to community property equipment that seemed to be used for personal landscaping, not HOA projects. The crowd leaned forward, eyes wide. Karen laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "You're mistaken. That's such approved work." But before Mark could respond, Mrs. Collins, the quiet neighbor who usually avoided confrontation, stood up trembling. "No, Karen, those men came to my house too. They told me I had to pay cash directly to you or they'd report me for violations." The room erupted in gasps. Karen's composure cracked for the first time. Her face flushed red. Mark seized the moment. "So this is where the fines are going? Straight into your pocket?" Karen snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "You don't understand what's at stake," she shouted, her voice trembling more than she intended. The words slipped out like a confession. The neighbors exchanged looks, confusion, fear, curiosity. What was Karen hiding? For the first time, Mark realized the fight wasn't just about money or power. There was something bigger, a hidden agenda none of them had seen coming. Asterisk, the boardroom was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Karen sat at the head of the long polished table, her lips curled in satisfaction as she shuffled the papers in front of her. "With this," she declared, "we finally have the evidence to take him down." But the silence didn't last long. From the far corner, a voice broke through. "Evidence? Or fabrication?" Everyone turned their heads sharply. It was Linda, one of the quieter HOA members, usually invisible in these heated discussions. She stood, clutching a folder to her chest, her hands trembling, but her eyes were steady. "Speak up, Linda," Karen hissed, her smile faltering. "I've been keeping track," Linda said, opening her folder and spreading photographs and notes across the table. "For weeks, I've documented everything. Every so-called violation Karen claimed David committed: trash bins, weeds, noise complaints, none of it adds up. On the nights Karen said his music was too loud, I was there. It was silent. The weeds she photographed? Pulled from her own backyard." Gasps rippled through the board. Karen's face darkened. "You're lying." But Linda didn't flinch. She slid one more photo forward. It showed Karen in the dead of night, sneaking into David's yard, placing a broken fence post and taking pictures with her phone. The timestamp was undeniable. "This is harassment, not enforcement," Linda said firmly, "and I won't stand by anymore." The room descended into chaos. Other members muttered, some in Karen's defense, some against her. David, sitting in the back, finally stood up. "I knew I wasn't losing my mind. She's been framing me from the start." Karen's composure shattered. She lunged forward, grabbing the photo, her voice shrieking, "You don't understand what he's capable of. I'm protecting this neighborhood." But the words fell flat. No one seemed to believe her anymore. And then Linda added one final dagger. "Karen, you've been watching David so closely." Too closely. Why? The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Karen froze, her eyes darting, her breath quickening. For the first time, she looked cornered. And David realized this wasn't about rules anymore. It was something darker. Asterisk, the boardroom was unusually tense that evening. Karen sat at the head of the table like a self-appointed queen, her lips pressed thin while flipping through a stack of papers. On the surface, she was confident, but her trembling hands betrayed something else: fear. The homeowners had begun asking too many questions. Michael, calm as always, leaned back in his chair across from her. "It's funny," he said, almost too casually, "how all the HOIS funds for neighborhood beautification went to repainting your house. Twice in 1 year." His voice echoed across the silent room. A murmur rippled through the other board members. Eyes darted toward Karen, who immediately slammed her fist on the table. "That is a disgusting lie," she barked. But no one missed, the sweat glistening on her forehead. For weeks, Michael had been gathering evidence. He wasn't just defending his right to build a simple garden shed anymore. He was uncovering a web of corruption. He discovered that Karen had secretly funneled HOA funds into personal projects, new landscaping, catered parties, even a suspicious consulting fee paid directly to her son. But what Michael didn't expect was an ally. Mrs. Thompson, a soft-spoken neighbor in her 70s, raised her hand. "I've lived here for 30 years, and I've never seen the HO so hostile. Michael is right. We need answers." Her voice cracked, but her words hit like thunder. Karen tried. Theo cut her off, shouting about protocol and respect. But the other board members shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, her authority didn't feel absolute. Later that night, Karen drove home and found a folded letter on her doorstep. No return address. Just a single line written in bold ink. "We know what you did. Stop now, or it won't. Just be Michael you're fighting." Karen's hand shook as she read it. She looked around, but the street was quiet. Too quiet. The cracks in her empire were showing, and someone else, someone she didn't know, had just entered the game. The neighborhood had been tense for weeks, but last night things escalated. I woke to whispers outside my window and spotted a group of neighbors gathered under the flickering streetlight. Among them was Karen, clutching her oversized binder, like it was a weapon. But what caught my eye was that she wasn't arguing. She was listening. And next to her, surprisingly, was Mr. Dempsey, the quiet man from the end of the street who rarely left his home. I slipped outside quietly, staying in the shadows. Their voices drifted toward me. "It's time we teach him a lesson," Karen hissed. "If the board won't act, we will." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Was she really rallying the neighbors against me? Or was this about something bigger? Dempsey's low, gravelly voice carried over. "You keep pressing too hard, Karen, and people will start asking questions about you. You don't want that." That stopped me cold. "What questions?" Karen, the queen of rules and gossip, had her own secrets. The group broke apart quickly, Karen storming off, muttering about property values and ungrateful neighbors. Dempsey walked in the opposite direction, but before he vanished into the dark, he glanced toward me. For a second, our eyes met. He knew I'd heard. The next morning, I found a note on my doorstep. No envelope, no signature. Just a single sentence scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Karen isn't what she seems. Watch the files." Files? My mind spun with possibilities. Could Karen be hiding something in her endless HOA paperwork? Or was there a darker history buried beneath the neat suburban lawns of our community? For the first time, I realized the fight wasn't just about me and Karen. This neighborhood was holding secrets, and I was right in the middle of it. The boardroom of the HOA was filled with tension. The members sat around the long mahogany table, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Karen, for once, wasn't yelling. Instead, she leaned forward with a cold smirk, her eyes glittering with malice. "They think they've won," she whispered, tapping her manicured nails against a stack of papers. "But we still have leverage." The president of the HOA, Mr. Gregory, adjusted his glasses nervously. Karen, the court has already ruled in the family's favor. If we push too hard, we could lose everything. Karen snapped her head toward him, her voice icy. Do you want to be remembered as the board that got destroyed by one family? No, we fight back. Her plan was simple but sinister. She had uncovered an old, nearly forgotten bylaw hidden deep in the HOA's handbook. It gave the board the authority to issue maintenance compliance checks on any property, at any time, under suspicion of violations. If they found enough small infractions, they could pile on daily fines until the debt buried the homeowners. The board murmured uneasily. That bylaw hasn't been used in decades, one member said. It was written back when the neighborhood had barns and horse sheds. It's outdated. Karen leaned closer, her voice low and venomous. Outdated doesn't mean invalid. If we enforce it, we can bleed them dry. Meanwhile, at the family's house, they were celebrating their small victories. Their kids played on the porch, laughing as their father grilled burgers. For the first time in months, peace felt possible. Then, the letter arrived, a thick envelope, stamped with the HOA seal. Inside were 10 citations, petty, absurd infractions. Grass blades over 3 inches, mailbox paint slightly faded, garden gnome exceeding height regulations, patio furniture not in approved color scheme. Each violation came with a fine. Each fine multiplied daily. The father's hand shook as he read the list. This is insane, he muttered. They're trying to drown us. His wife clenched the letter, her eyes blazing. This isn't about rules. This is Karen. She's not stopping until we're destroyed. Unbeknownst to them, Karen was already preparing the next move, a secret weapon hidden in the HOA's archives that could push the family to the brink of losing their home entirely. And she intended to play it soon. Asterisk, the day of the HOA's reckoning had finally arrived. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, local journalists, and even a few curious residents from nearby communities who had heard about the infamous case of Karen and her HOA board. The judge entered, and silence swept the room. Mark sat at the plaintiff's table, his evidence meticulously organized. Karen strutted in with her lawyer, her usual smugness still painted across her face, but her eyes revealed nervous flickers. Mark's lawyer began. Your Honor, this is not just a case about fines. It's about harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power. One by one, neighbors came forward with their testimonies. Unfair fines, threats, bullying, and the way Karen manipulated HOA rules to control others. Then came the most shocking moment. Mark played the audio recording, the one where Karen admitted she purposely targeted him to set an example for the neighborhood. Gasps filled the courtroom. Even her own lawyer seemed taken aback. Karen jumped to her feet. That was taken out of context. He's twisting my words, she screamed. The judge banged the gavel. One more outburst, and you'll be held in contempt. The defense tried to salvage the case, but it was too late. Mark's evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed the HOA had misused funds under Karen's leadership. Emails revealed her threats to silence residents. Even the city inspector confirmed that Karen had tried to bribe him into writing false reports against Mark. The judge leaned forward. Karen, your actions as HOA president are a disgrace. You abused your authority, misused funds, and violated the trust of this community. You are hereby removed from your position permanently. Furthermore, you are personally liable for damages, and the HOA will face state investigation. The room erupted in cheers. Karen, red-faced and furious, was escorted out by bailiffs. Her reign of terror was over. Mark, for the first time in months, felt a wave of peace wash over him. Neighbors hugged him, thanking him for standing up when no one else dared. You didn't just fight for yourself, one said. You fought for all of us. Later that evening, The neighborhood held a block party. Families gathered, music played, kids ran around freely without Karen scolding them for breaking imaginary rules. Mark smiled as he realized this wasn't just the end of Karen. It was the beginning of a stronger, united community. Karen's story spread online, making national headlines. She had become a cautionary tale of abuse and downfall. But for Mark, the biggest victory wasn't the fame or the court ruling. It was finally reclaiming peace in his own home. And as he looked around at his smiling neighbors, Mark knew one thing for certain: Karen would never win again.